Word on this. I got it.
Okay.
All right. Um, Hello everyone. This is our banned books project team discussion of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I'm Allison. I work for Picture This Post as sort of like a summer editorial intern for the banned books project team. Um, yeah, someone else take it away.
Yeah, I'm Daniel. I'm also kind of a summer editorial intern, content creator, or content curator, for Research Triangle Park. And I'm also the Banned Books team.
Hi, I'm Nox. I'm also a summer editorial intern, and I'm in the New York area, so I handle that end of things.
All right, I'm Jillian. Um, I'm just kind of here. I'm actually the music content curator for Picture This Post. So I'm just interested in banned books. So
We have some new people.
Bella looks tough frozen.
Let's see. Hi, we're going through introductions right now, so if you guys want to go ahead.
Sorry, guys, my Wi-Fi just kicked me out.
No, you're so good. Don't worry. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Bella?
Yeah. I'm Bella. I'm a book content curator for the summer at Picture This Post. Yeah.
Perfect. Do our two new people that join want to introduce themselves?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nina. I do theater reviews and film reviews mostly.
Hi, I'm Pritesh. I do film reviews and music reviews and book reviews. Pictures of this number.
Awesome. You guys do have a link to the study guide, correct? Okay, great. Yeah, because we're just going to be going off of that. And yeah, let's get started. Starting with the first question. What was everyone's opinion on the book, and what would you rate it out of 10? Anybody feel strongly and want to go first? Go ahead,
Go
Jill.
ahead.
Go ahead.
So I grew up reading these books. Literally like as babies and toddlers, my dad sat down and read these books to me and all my siblings. Um, so I've really grown up with them. So in that regard, I really do enjoy them and the world that Harry Potter has created. However, looking back on it as an adult, I think there are plenty of things in it that need to be addressed because they are very controversial and you know.
Definitely. Out of 10, what would you say that you would rate it now?
Oh boy, now I'd still give it like a solid 6 or 7, just because I feel like there's so much potential in it. And people have taken it far beyond the actual storyline. So as a whole, yeah, 6 or 7. Other parts later.
Yeah, we'll get to it.
Yeah.
I definitely have to agree with you. Like, pretty much exact same story with me. Like, I grew up with these books since like elementary school. Rereading it, there's obviously that sense of nostalgia that's very, very strong, and I will always have a soft spot in my heart for the story. But reading it as an adult, there are definitely a lot of things that need to be addressed. So, and we can't just ignore that. So, being nice and diplomatic, I'd also give it about like a 6.
Yeah, I've got a very similar story. I was raised on these books. They were kind of the first books I read on my own, especially the Sorcerer's Stone. So there's a lot of nostalgia there. Then reading again as an adult, as someone who's gone through college and who's kind of studied how to write stories. It's a very good like introduction to a fantasy world story. It just kind of follows every plot beat that needs to happen. It's nice, but then there's also, you think about everything that's been happening outside of these books tied to the author and the IP, and there's definitely a lot to think about. And I'm kind of on the same line. I'm like, this is a 6 or a 7 for me.
I know we're gonna get into this later, but I am on the opposite, like complete opposite end of the spectrum. I have never read Harry Potter. This is my first time reading it. And that is because I am to literally till the day I die, I'm a Percy Jackson fan. I'm never letting go of that. And every single time I brought Percy Jackson up, it was always, "Oh, have you read Harry Potter?" And I was like, "No, I'm not gonna read it just out of like in spite, just out of spite." But I did. Some of my friends made me watch the movies like last year, and I did enjoy the movies, and then I read the book this time, and I did enjoy it. I mean, like to a certain extent. But yeah, I would also give it a 7, maybe a 6. I'm not sure. But yeah.
I have a kind of similar story where like I hated on Harry Potter literally my entire life. Made fun of my friends, made fun of my little sister who was reading them. And then this summer before I went to college, my sister made me sit down and actually watch them and like fell in love with the movies, read the books. But I also like the books. I think I have such a strong connection with the movies because of the time that I watched them, like moving away from home with my sis, watching with my family, that kind of stuff. The book itself, the quality of it, I would also give like a 6 or a 7. It's still good and like it's nostalgic for a different reason, I think.
The first few books are definitely written for kids, though.
Okay.
So that's
Yeah.
always.
Yeah, and I feel like it was also the first book that I read that was so like magical and like had all these kind of things that were making me dream. And I think definitely like rereading it after like spending so many years now, like having so much content that's equally as fantastical, especially like on TV and on Netflix or whatever. Like I feel like it was such an event to get the DVDs of Harry Potter and get to watch the things or like have the movies, that I think that informed so much how much I liked it versus reading it now being like, okay, this is not that different from other things that kids will have access to, that have so much less controversy attached to it, and that will give them like a better like introduction to the world of literature.
Definitely. That was great, guys. Anyone else before we move on?
Yeah. I'd like just to agree with everything. Harry Potter has a special place in my heart as a book because I'm pretty sure it was the book that got me to reading. Like it was like the first book that like I actually checked out at the library. Um, so this is the book especially. So reading it again, especially a blast from the past. And I give it somewhere around a 7.
Solid. Very solid.
I'm curious before we continue, what are everybody's houses? Just
Oh, that's a great question. That's a good one.
I'm Ravenclaw. I actually took the Hogwarts test thing on whatever the website's called.
mhm.
Respectable. Nice.
Yeah.
I'm a Hufflepuff from the official test.
I don't actually remember. I don't. Allie, do you remember?
I think you got like Slytherin or something.
Okay, I think
Yeah.
I am a Slytherin or
Yeah.
something.
I'm a Slytherin as well. So we have that in common.
I'm a Gryffindor. For the test.
So we got the whole.
I'm a Gryffindor. because it's
Almost
the main characters.
Yeah, in the test I was a Gryffindor too, but I definitely think I'm a Hufflepuff as a person.
Let's see. Okay. Next question. Does anybody want to Okay, Daniel, do you want to take this one? Short introduction
Yeah.
as to why the book's been banned?
So just a little historical introduction as to why the book is banned and why it's constantly kind of in controversy outside of J.K. Rowling. It kind of started immediately when it got released, but there was a lot of controversy with religious groups tied to the belief that this book would lead children to performing witchcraft and doing some satanistic stuff and occult stuff. And there was this belief that it was leading children astray and leading them to be disrespectful and to counter authority. And so it did get banned a lot in Christian schools and in more religious institutions. And then also kind of in more religious areas of the world. This is still kind of an ongoing thing, though it's kind of died down a bit as people have gotten a little more understanding that that's not exactly how it works. But yeah.
And then that leads us to the next question. Where has this book been banned? Which is in the UK, also Christian schools primarily. Also in Tennessee specifically, in Catholic schools, once again, that religious aspect. Does anybody want to touch on that? Like, why would you agree, like, for religious reasons that this book should have been banned or that it should have been brought up at all?
I mean, my best friend throughout like middle school and high school, for the longest time, her parents would not let her read Harry Potter at all, even though like I was like, you gotta read it, you gotta read it. So eventually she did read it and she got her parents to read it and they all absolutely love it now. But it was for religious reasons that she wasn't able to read it originally, which like I understand, but I don't know.
Yeah, I personally just find it very interesting that a children's book that's so fantastical and magical can sort of be like twisted into this like sort of like I don't know and like place a stigma against like, you know, children's books and like that there's some underlying like demonic reason for like I don't want to call it ridiculous. Like I feel like that would be mean to say it's ridiculous because, you know, like people come to their own conclusions, but I think when it comes to children's literature, I feel like as long as they're picking up a book and enjoying it and learning, like I think we should definitely embrace that.
Yeah, and I think as someone who loves reading fantasy and someone who grew up on Harry Potter and a lot of other fantasy books like Percy Jackson, it's important for kids to read these more fantasy type novels because it helps to develop their imagination. It's just a lot of fun.
Exactly.
Yeah, I also do. I did find it a little bit surprising because I think there's a lot of other fantasy novels that are a little more like out of like this realm and like a little bit more like I don't know, Harry Potter to a certain degree is like, you know, like grounded in the real world, like at least they're all like humans, like they're not like just random creatures. And there are fantasy books that are like fantastical creatures and like that have like different kinds of powers, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's like a little surprising to be like, why Harry Potter and why not also all of these other books, you know?
Exactly.
Also, the first book is super light in its content. Like it's not as dark as the later books. So yeah, Voldemort's not as big of a threat in this book as he becomes. And yeah, it's interesting to see that like this book specifically gets banned when this one isn't that bad.
Yeah, and I think the darkest stuff that happens in this book is just tied to Harry's parents dying and him being an orphan and then having to deal with very abusive household stuff, which
The
is
Quirrell stuff is a little
it's
Yeah.
a
a little out there, but
Anyone else? All right. Let's move on. Okay. So starting off with our newer readers who were like introduced to it sort of late in life, what were your thoughts on Harry Potter going into this book, knowing that it's practically considered a classic, and on top of that, knowing the personal views of the author? Also, following up really quickly, what did you know about Harry Potter going into it prior to reading the book?
Okay, that's me. I I don't know. I obviously I said like I said before, I've watched the movies before and I did really enjoy the movies. But when I was reading it, I was kind of going into it with like in mind how the things that J.K. Rowling has said. And I think that's like a little bit different from when you're growing up reading the books because that's not something you're like aware of yet. Because that's just your childhood. It's, oh, I'm reading Harry Potter. Who cares who the author is, you know? And then when you grow up and you realize, okay, the authors have like their own feelings and their thoughts, and this will kind of lead into a different question is like how to what degree can you separate the art from who's making it? And that's what like when I was reading it, I was like, okay, like, oh, do I find anything like suspicious like hidden in between the lines? Like is there any like underlying meaning, and I didn't really find it that much. I know that I know that like certain people believe that there are certain characters who like are like, I don't know. I'm not completely educated on it, but I do know that like certain people think that there are underlying remarks that she makes. But for me, it was like kind of just like a pleasant read. It's not as heavy as we said, like as some of the later books. And I did have the movies to go off of, so I was like, okay, it's a little fun, like, oh, yay, wizards, like that kind of thing. But yeah, it definitely reads as a children's book though, for the especially the first couple. So
Great. Anyone else? First time readers?
I can go. I think I was very cautious about how I consumed it. I used like I read a secondhand book when I got more into it, buying merch from Etsy instead of like the official store, just doing stuff like that when I can. And it's definitely weird to be enjoying something that you know was made by such a hateful person, which we'll cover later. So I did have that in the back of my mind as I was reading it. Yeah.
yeah, and I also like kind of what was Bella was saying is like the art has like kind of spiraled out of her grasp, I think, to like because it's such a big franchise, you know? It's like all over the world, it's like universally recognizable because so many people make it to be that way. Like people make their own art out of it who have like who have different views from J.K. Rowling. People make their own like I know there's so many like fan fictions on the internet and that's their own like form of work. There's like artwork that's inspired by the books and it's all like their own artwork. Like obviously it's heavily inspired by J.K. Rowling, but you can also kind of to a certain degree say that they are making like making their own spin of it, which kind of deviates from the horridness of the author, I guess.
And going into it later in life, you have like decades worth of fan-made content to look at. You're not restricted to just the original books and the movies.
And kind of off of that, our three main actors, Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson, they're all phenomenal people. They're all huge activists, and they're the face of this at this point. So I feel like that also kind of offsets, you know, some of the controversy around it just because they are such big activists and great people, it seems like, you know.
Yeah, I definitely say it balances out to some extent and sort of keeps the hope of the franchise alive for sure.
It does. It's tough though, because since it is for kids, I feel like it's so hard. Kids won't do the like research, or like they shouldn't have to do the research of figuring out like who to put as the role model for the franchise. And I feel like when you're an artist of any kind, you will become like a role model, a celebrity if you have a large platform. And it still like kind of irks me that like if a kid really gets into Harry Potter and starts following J.K. Rowling on Twitter or something, like that will always be associated with it, and like having to be exposed to that at such a young age from something that you thought you loved so much and that was made for you, like is hard, even if you have access to these all the other things that you might just not have the ability to like differentiate.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, so then from there we can just, you know, ask our readers who feel a much deeper connected sense of nostalgia, what was this reread like for you? And on top of that, if you have any additional like thoughts on like why it's been banned, or if you just want to speak right into the controversy and we can shift on that as well.
Yeah, I hadn't read this. I haven't read any Harry Potter books since I was maybe in middle school, give or take. So my most recent experience with Harry Potter is the movies. So then when I was reading this back, all I could imagine is as I was reading through the scenes was like, oh, this was not in the movie. This wasn't the movie. This wasn't in the movie. This character wasn't in it at all. You know, they go into the Great Hall and like I can imagine this from the movie scene, but I'm not imagining it how she's describing it. And I just thought that was really interesting for me. I didn't really feel a deep sense of nostalgia when I was reading it, but I did just kind of like, I enjoyed the figuring out which was and wasn't in the movie, and then trying to separate myself from J.K. Rowling's uh crap while I was reading it, so I didn't just immediately put it back down.
Yeah. I feel like when it comes to a reread of like Harry Potter nowadays, I feel like since having that like younger sort of connection, it is a lot harder because your initial reaction is to just immediately love it because of all the memories surrounding it and all that happiness and like, your love for literature probably, like, first beginning. And it's really hard to try and sort of like turn that off, being like the person who wrote this beautiful story is like not as great as we once thought she was, like, and it just sort of like makes me feel sad like how someone could write something so great and essentially, and just the fact that she created this beautiful magical world where people like, can become, I guess they found a lot of safety in it. And it just sucks, rereading it knowing that people who like really found comfort in her story can no longer have that. um and if anyone else wants to touch on that, I think that would be a good transition to talk about our discussion of just separating art from the artist, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, I wanted to say, definitely about like it's kind of disappointing for J.K. Rowling to be like transphobic, like like being all of these like queer phobic, kind of saying all these queer phobic remarks, because I know that for a lot of queer people, they found a lot of comfort in Harry Potter because they kind of related to being like different, or like they found comfort in being like, oh, if being different was like amazing and you could go away to like a different world and you could like, I don't know, like fly around on brooms. I don't know. But like just like that kind of feeling of safety in a different world is something that you're supposed to get from books. And that's what you're supposed to like find in books, is like a feeling of safety, a feeling of like um what's the word? Like finding yourself in the book, like recognizing like parts of a different character's struggle and relating to that yourself. So it's like extremely disappointing. So I do know that like it gets like the line between the art and the artist kind of blur when like the art is something that some people can take comfort in, and then when they look towards the author who they're like hoping to take comfort in as well, they can, because they like art, she's queer phobic and that kind of thing.
Yeah. As a queer person, literally, I was figuring myself out in late middle school, early high school. And I feel like that's kind of when a lot of this started gaining more traction, like hearing what she was saying. And that was just kind of gutting because, you'd heard about all this great stuff she'd done. And then all of a sudden it's all this transphobic and, like you said, queer phobic remarks she's making. And it's kind of like, okay, well, what do I do now?
Yeah, because I feel like fantasy has become like such, like it is a huge thing for queer kids. I mean, I read so much gay fan fiction on the internet from Harry Potter. It was awesome. And it is kind of like, it is really disappointing because you're like, if someone wrote this that I relate to so much, like they must have some underlying knowledge of what I'm going through. And especially as a kid, that's so important. And I feel like also, I feel like we were young at a time where like I didn't have access to social media really until like kind of later. So there were very few people that I looked up to, I guess, like maybe a little bit more than now. And it would be like authors or like the one singer that I was allowed to listen to on the radio. And you can only kind of imagine. So yeah, once you get a little older and all of a sudden you have access to all this information, it kind of like shatters your like all the fantasies that you build around this person that you're like, they were writing things for me. And then they're like, no, they weren't at all.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of just separating art from the artist, I feel like it's something I've tried to think about is that art isn't made in a vacuum, that there's someone who creates it and that person puts in their own thoughts subconsciously into that art. So like if people do see kind of these signs, even in our writing, like one of the things people talk about a lot is the goblins and how they might be like Jewish stand-ins, and that can be seen sometimes, and it's a little disturbing, especially as an adult, and you're reading like, oh, that's a bit of a problem. So yeah, it's very disappointing because as a kid I did kind of look up to her.
Yeah. And I feel like now when it comes to in this specific scenario, we've come to a point where I feel like this franchise is just so much more than her. Like we've been saying, like, you know, so much art has been created from this, and people are able to just like find a lot of comfort in other things. And we don't necessarily have to associate this story and this world with her because we've now taken it and sort of made it our own. And like, I don't know, I feel like as a fan base, it's also very important, like, to know that we can all come together and sort of like, you know, be like, we can all enjoy the story, but recognize and, you know, just like hold her accountable for, you know, her thoughts and her actions, because it is just like unforgivable at this point. Um, moving on, what purpose do you think that this book serves today?
I still think Harry Potter as a whole is a great way to like introduce kids to reading. Just for the sheer fact that the first few books are fairly easy reads. They are introducing a whole new world of fantasy that a lot of kids they can get from a bunch of other sources as well. But I feel like for children's books wise, it's a staple at this point, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's definitely a classic. Just like you said, it's blown up a lot in terms of just cultural impact, in spite of everything else. And it's definitely a very good starting point for children looking into getting into fantasy.
Yeah, I think it's sort of elevated to the point where it's kind of like an institution, like Disney, for kids, with its theater park, right? Kids can, you can visit Harry Potter in your home and then go on vacation to see Harry Potter. So it's something much more bigger than just a book at this point.
Definitely.
Yeah,
you-
I definitely. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You have the new show coming out within the next couple of years. That'll be a decade-long project. That'll definitely reintroduce younger kids to it. So I don't think Harry Potter's going anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I was gonna say the same thing. It's definitely not going anywhere, but I do think like maybe sometime in the future because we have grown up on Harry Potter and we also have grown up on like realizing how horrible of a person J.K. Rowling is. Our generation can kind of teach the next generations about like why Harry Potter is an amazing series, but J.K. Rowling isn't, and like kind of also uplifting like different kinds of fantasy novels that are like equally like as easy to read and good to introduce to kids, like from POC authors or queer authors and things like that.
If off of that, how do we feel about like the new show and I guess Hogwarts Legacy came out because they are good forms of media. However, they are supporting J.K. Rowling, which I think has been the big holdup for me, at least. I don't want to support anything relating to her at all, but I also do love Harry Potter, and there's,
Yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of hard because like you guys were saying, like it's not gonna go anywhere. So it's very clear that it's gonna be a part of it. Do hope that like any new shows that they make like directly address all the problems that people saw with like the other movies, because I feel like to just create something new that is better without actually like acknowledging that there's such a strong connection to all of this conversation would kind of like defeat the purpose of making something new. Because while a lot of people in our generation do think she's horrible, like a lot of people don't. And I think that keep like making space for her stories just will give people space to be like, you can't like it because like she doesn't, she's queer phobic, and if you like the show, then you gotta somehow associate with those ideas. So I hope they like very directly kind of separate from that and acknowledge it, and like, I don't know, bring people into the writing team that are the complete opposite of her ideology, and I don't know, and kind of give that context to kids, because otherwise it's, I think, just going to be a little tough to watch.
I know that Ali and I, like a couple weeks ago, we went and saw Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, which is on Broadway. And that was actually really cool. And it was like, it was very interesting. We got the tickets like discounted, and it was like
Lottery. Yeah.
I was like, we want to give as like the least amount of money to J.K. Rowling as we can. But it was really an amazing show. And I did see like the Twitter discourse, like, and the like general discourse after, like they were acknowledging like J.K. Rowling is transphobic, but this is still a great show, and it wasn't like kind of brushing off what she has said and what she's done, but it was like acknowledging but still appreciating the artwork of so many different actors and like those kinds of things.
I've never actually seen it. I've only read it, so I can't speak for the actual experience of it. Because I've heard phenomenal things about the actual show, and just reading over the script and whatnot, I feel like, yes, it would be a great show. However, she had so many opportunities for just so much representation within the show that she just brushed over and didn't. It bothered me when reading it. Again, probably completely different when actually watching it, but reading it, I was very annoyed.
Yeah, I definitely want to say also, though, that was really refreshing for me to see, was that I know a lot of people like saw Hermione as Black, and both the Hermione was Black in the show. So that like was played by a Black actor too. So that was really refreshing to see too.
Definitely. Sadly, we are sort of pressed for time, so I'm going to leave us with the final question. Do you think the book should be banned? I'll start. I don't think it should be. You know, I think it's an important, just really magical, just great book for kids to get into reading. And I think it's important that we just try and take this story away from J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important book for kids. Especially the first couple are just great children's books. At most, I'd say maybe just have like a little, I don't know, little excerpt at the start, like, hey, this is some stuff that's happening with the author. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of older media kind of has that at this point.
Yeah.
Because, you know, reading old books or whatever, there are things in it that today is not seen as acceptable and shouldn't have been that way in the past, but they are a part of our history and kind of show how much we've grown as a species. Just if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, less than 1 minute left. Anyone else?
No, it's a special book series, and it's very powerful, and it's really important for kids today to see some things that, you know, they might not see within their traditional households. So
Yeah, definitely don't ban. It's incredibly important to develop imagination that way. So
Okay. Great. Thank you, everyone.